What's that? It's time for a reading vlog? Hi, hello, my name is Taylor. I am an aspiring author, screenwriter, and playwright, and for the past year I have been on the hunt for one very specific book. Yesterday I happened to be in the library picking up some books for research for a new novel I'm working on when I came across, I kid you not, on a display, that very book. In this reading vlog, I am going to be taking you through the process of my experience with reading The Chosen and the Beautiful by Nghi. When I tell you that I am so excited to read this book, I am an avid fan of The Great Gatsby and basically every reimagining that I can get my hands on, whether that be stage, screen, or novel. In addition to reading, of course, the original Great Gatsby, seeing Baz Luhrmann's film multiple times, watching bits and pieces of the original film adaptation, listening again and again to the original cast recording of the musical, reading up on every stage adaptation, and reading a number of books. This book I have been so excited to read. To make sure that I do this book justice in introducing it to you, let's read the inside flap together. Immigrant, socialite, magician. Jordan Baker grows up in the most rarefied circles of 1920s American society. She has money, education, a killer golf handicap, and invitations to some of the most exclusive parties of the jazz age. She's also queer and Asian, a Vietnamese adoptee treated as an exotic attraction by her peers, while the most important doors remain closed to her. But the world is full of wonders, infernal pacts and dazzling illusions, lost ghosts and elemental mysteries. In all paper is fire, and Jordan can burn the cut paper heart out of a man. She just has to learn how. So this is not only a reimagining of The Great Gatsby that puts Jordan Baker in the limelight, reimagining her as a queer Asian American young woman, but it is a fantasy crossover. As a big fan of science fiction and someone with a growing interest in fantasy, the fact that we get more of a surreal adaptation of The Great Gatsby is super duper exciting to me, which is why I am also very excited for the latest Great Gatsby adaptation that is coming out this fall called Local Heavens. And so I think this is such a great time to read this book in lieu of the centennial celebration of The Great Gatsby, in lieu of the newest adaptation coming out, and the only thing to do is to get reading. Let's read! Alright, it's update time. This is well overdue, as it's now almost been a week since I started reading The Chosen and the Beautiful, but so far, so good. I will start by apologizing for the fact that this is a reading vlog and you haven't seen me reading at all. Actually, let me fix that. Okay. Oh, that one might have been a bad idea. Just keep living on the edge. I am really enjoying this book. Obviously, I am enjoying the retelling of The Great Gatsby. I love that story as a standalone, so obviously mostly anything I'm gonna read I'm probably gonna have a positive reception to if it is a well done adaptation, and so far I think this is. I am just about a third of the way through the book, or so it looks like. I'm on page 80 in chapter 7. And here's what I've noticed so far. We get two different things from this book in terms of plot structure and timing. The first one is, of course, the retelling of The Great Gatsby itself, but the second one is more of a backstory on the events leading up to The Great Gatsby, focusing on when Jordan and Daisy were teenagers, their upbringings and their friendship, and when Daisy meets Jay for the first time. To the extent of my knowledge, the only other time we get sort of a foreshadowing and a more succinct backstory like this is in Beautiful Little Fools, which is a murder mystery adaptation of The Great Gatsby. But other than that, a lot of books focus more on what's happening in the now. The same case with the musical, and the movies, of course, is all about what is happening in F. Scott Fitzgerald's actual text, whereas this not only fleshes out Jordan's story a lot more, her relationships with the characters and what's happening in the now as she starts to take Nick to Gatsby's parties and people get reconnected and reintroduced, but you also get the events that led them to this point, and it's mixed with magic. There are rules to this world, there are things to understand about different potions and sort of magical remedies and medications and different effects that things have, but the world building doesn't dizzy you. For lack of a better word, it's not as wild and hard to understand as stepping into one of Jay Gatsby's parties, say that you were to do that. This world building, it makes sense with the story. I'm nodding along with it. It's easy to suspend my disbelief and to fall into what these rules are. There's not a million rules like in The Cruel Prince. So each time something magical does come up, it is often something new at this point in the story, but it is all things that make sense within the realm of this world and the realm of the magic that's being introduced. You know, it's all within that scope. I think something that's important to remember with this book is that it is a retelling of The Great Gatsby, so part of me was going, okay, where does the magic come into play? But it's of course going to come into play as the plot thickens, and especially as we reach the catastrophic events at the end of the book. I'm trying to keep this as spoiler-free as possible for anyone who hasn't read The Great Gatsby, for anyone who hasn't read The Chosen and the Beautiful and is scoping out whether they want to read this story. I think that you can definitely read a book like The Chosen and the Beautiful without reading The Great Gatsby. I think it gives you more perspective on the book, but I don't think it's something that's an absolute necessary. I think you can absolutely dive right into this book. I think if The Great Gatsby isn't your thing necessarily, but you're interested in a similar sort of story, you want something more fantasy-based especially, this would be for you. There have also been some good discussions and analyses and perspectives on race and class in the 1920s. In this story, Jordan comes to Louisville as a Vietnamese adoptee, so we get a lot of perspective on what it's like for her to grow up in a world surrounded by girls who don't look like her, girls who kind of treat her as someone exotic, or like, you know, she's more of a pet or an accessory, and how her friendship with Daisy grounded her through those times, but also how, you know, Daisy wanted her own different things, so she acts both as a leader and as her own sort of affliction, and that explains a lot of Jordan's personality as she gets older. So I really appreciate that sort of introspective perspective. That's a mouthful. I'm getting distracted because there's a quote from R.F. Kuang on the back. I really like that description of the workers in the ash field. Okay, I think I've got to read this to you. From my spot on the train, as we pulled into the station for a brief and pointless stop, I could see them plodding with a kind of dull and frustrated purpose among the ash heaps, armed with shovels and clothed in grime. I imagined their lungs were protected in their youth by keeping their mouths shut tight. Then, as they grew older themselves, more prone to voice their opinions, more eager to make sure that the world did not go 1 second longer without their words than it absolutely had to, the ash went over, sliding over their skin and then into their open mouths. What? That's so good. I'm a terrible booktuber. Terrible, just awful. Welcome back to my coverage of reading The Chosen and the Beautiful, and I have a lot to catch you up on. The other day I ended up doing a massive reading sprint. I was about halfway through the book, and now I'm here. I have 2 pages left. I wanted to check in before I finish the book because, wow, this is a really wonderful adaptation of The Great Gatsby. Having read more of it, I believe I mentioned this already, but I can confirm that you don't need to read The Great Gatsby. You will have more insight into some of the stuff that is happening. It will change your perspective on the source material, but you do not need to read that to enjoy this book. This is not a direct retelling of The Great Gatsby. A lot of the scenes are omitted because they are coming from Jordan's perspective, and others are altered to include her, which is made possible by her growing relationship with Nick, as well as her long-term very, very close friendship with Daisy. If you are a fan of plot twists, if you are a fan of last-minute revelations that have sort of been brewing throughout a longer plot. If you are a fan of finding things out with the character, this is a great book. This book has some really fun twists and turns, especially in the end, that I have really enjoyed uncovering alongside Jordan. There is an especially big plot twist that happens during a conversation between her and Nick that I will not spoil, but blew my mind. I think there are two really key parts to this book, and one of them is Jordan's identity as an Asian immigrant in the 1920s, and the other part is Gatsby's love for Daisy being categorized as more of a direct obsession. The fantasy elements of the book contribute to both of these key plots and storylines, and sometimes it's in very shocking, surprising ways that totally make sense, but at the same time blow your mind. One thing that I would advise looking into before you read this book, regardless of whether or not you've read The Great Gatsby, is the Manchester Act. This was a 1924 Immigration Act, also known as the Johnson-Reed Act, that greatly impacted the lives of immigrants in the United States. If I've got it correct, the act put a quota on how many people can come into the United States each year, and it greatly affected the lives, as I said, of so many immigrants, including, as you will see, Jordan Baker. If you want some additional reading, I would also recommend looking into the history of paper cutting, as it's a very important part of Jordan's background. It's something that she comes to understand as being a part of her history, and actually there is article that the author herself wrote about the history of paper cutting and the magic of the chosen and the beautiful. The article can be found on The Reactor, which is a digital science fiction fantasy publication, and I will make sure to link it in the description. It's definitely a fascinating topic. It's something I would recommend more if you're looking for supplemental information, whereas the Manchester Act, having even a brief background on that, will be helpful in understanding this text. I don't want to dive too much deeper into Gatsby's obsession with Daisy because, like I said, I don't want to spoil anything, but I am really enjoying this book, which I am so happy about, especially because I was looking for it for so long. Highly recommend if you're a fan of Gatsby, highly recommend if you like fantasy, if you like dark magic, anything along those lines. Definitely check this out. It has a slower start, but once you really get into the story and into what is happening, this book might very well blow your mind, some of these plot twists. I will mention very briefly, as I say that I'm not going to mention anything else, I do really enjoy some of those more intimate moments where we get to spend time with Jordan as she explores different places. Some of them she finds to be second homes and more sacred to her and who she has become in New York, and some of which she rediscovers as a part of learning her past and her heritage. Okay, let's finish the book. Oh man, that was nice. The book has echoes of Nick's narrative, but it's definitely been personalized to Jordan, and I think that would be the case for any character, you know, besides someone like Daisy who's so under Gatsby's spell. There's this sort of outsider piece to it. There's this idea of being on the outside of this ring of all this wild stuff that's happening and taking it in from that, not to use the word outside again, but that outside perspective. And there is something similar, I think, that's underlined in Jordan and Nick in this book, and you see that somewhat in the narrative style, but at the same time, this is absolutely Jordan's story as intended by the author. Parts of this is absolutely its own narrative, and parts of it do give a deeper reading and interpretation of The Great Gatsby. Overall, I really enjoyed it. It can be read in longer sittings. As I said, I read about half the book in over an hour, probably 2 hours. the time piled up and it didn't feel like a long time. It felt very enjoyable, but at the same time it doesn't feel as though it's a super easy read that you're just reading to pass the time. I like the insight, I like the magic, I like the world that's been built because it makes sense. It does not leave you wondering what's happening here, what's going on there. It's well thought out. It's not entirely standalone. There are pieces that come from the source text, but it does feel like its own standalone work at the same time, and it was thoroughly enjoyable. It raises really important questions of identity, of immigration. It feels very relevant to today, even though it takes place in the 1920s. The characters are compelling, their secrets are compelling, the things that they share with each other and choose to not share with each other. I'm rambling, but I just finished the book that I've been trying to find for a year. At least, at the very least. This is definitely in the 4 to 5 star category in my book. I will be writing a longer review on Goodreads once I have had time to process my thoughts. But as I said, if you're a fan of The Great Gatsby, read this. If you're a fan of fantasy, if you're a fan of identity pieces, if you're a fan of magic, if you're any of those things, this is it's a fun, compelling, enjoyable reimagining of The Great Gatsby, and it might be one of my favorites. It's hard to choose a favorite because there aren't a ton of Great Gatsby reimaginings. This will have been the third one that I've read, I believe, and I'm super excited for the newest one coming out in October, I believe, called Local Heavens. That's going to be a steampunk futuristic reimagining of The Great Gatsby, so maybe I'll do a reading vlog for that too, but my apologies for not being the very best booktuber. Nevertheless, I hope that you enjoyed my experience with The Chosen and The Beautiful, and that if you are enticed, you add this to your TBR because I would recommend it. Thanks for watching!